Hi, it's me, Julie Hill, and you're watching How I Make a T-Shirt, Part 2. In Part 1, I showed you how I made a t-shirt pattern for my daughter and also how I cut it out using fabric from a bigger t-shirt. In this video, I'll show you how I sew it all together. Here's my pattern, all cut out and ready to sew. Here's the front, the back, the sleeves, and the neck ribbing. And the first thing I do is put the front and back together with the right sides together, and I'm going to sew across the shoulder seams. I usually don't even pin it for this part. I put my stitch length around 3 for a t-shirt. And remember, when I made my pattern, I only gave myself 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so now I can put the edge of the fabric right at the edge of the presser foot. And I like to reinforce my seams by sewing it again, just right inside the seam allowance. Now for the neckband. This part can be tricky. You have to guess how much to stretch it based on how stretchy the ribbing is. There is a formula where you measure the neck opening and then you make the ribbing 20% smaller, but it doesn't work. And that's because ribbing comes in all different degrees of stretchiness. So forget the formula. When I tried it, the neckband was too tight and the neck opening was all puckered. So this is what I do. Fold the shirt and fold the neckband. And if there's a seam in the back of the neckband, make sure it'll be in the back of the t-shirt. Then I place the ribbing on top of the neck opening, overlapping it just a little. The ribbing needs to be tighter than the neck opening, but not too tight. So what I do is I stretch it only as much as it will easily stretch, a little at a time until I get to the very back. And it goes like this. So hold it with this hand and stretch it a little. It'll stretch about that far. Now hold it with this hand and let this one snap over a little. Do it again. Okay, and when I get to the back, I mark it with a pin. And here's how big the ribbing needs to be for this shirt. Now I just need to open up the neckband with the right sides together and move the pin, but put it back in the same place. Now I know exactly where to sew. I'm going to go ahead and cut off this extra ribbing. Okay, now I open up the inside seam so that it'll lay flat. And there's my neckband. The seam that I just stitched is the center back. And I need to find the center front and put a pin in it. and I'm going to pin the center front of the neckband to the center front of the shirt, which is why this notch is here. And you'll see that I'm pinning it to the right side of the fabric. And the center back seam gets pinned to the center back notch. Okay, and this next part really needs to be done from the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, so I need to stretch the neckband to fit the neck opening and pin it somewhere in the middle. You can use your teeth if you need to. But this neckband is so small that I can just reach it with my hand. So when I'm sewing this, I always sew these shoulder seams here to the back. And you can pin them to the back if you want to. I usually don't because I feel like too many pins can get in the way. Now I'm going to sew the ribbing onto the neck opening, stretching the ribbing to fit as I go. I'll start at the back and make sure to keep these raw edges lined up. Also, I don't put the edge of the fabric right at the edge of the presser foot. I like to keep it in about 1 centimeter or so. And anytime I need to stop, I make sure to stop with the needle down through the fabric. That will keep the fabric from sliding out of place. Now I get to turn it right side out and see how it looks. And it looks like I made the ribbing the right length. But if it were too tight or too loose, this would be a good time to take it apart and redo it. But since I like the way it looks, I'm going to go ahead and finish it with a zigzag stitch that goes halfway off the edge, like this. Time to put on the sleeves. I lay out the shirt with the right side up and pin the sleeve on, right sides together. I start by pinning the notch to the shoulder seam, and I push the shoulder seam to the back. And then pin the rest of it. Now, because the curve of the sleeve isn't the same as the curve of the arm opening, I'm going to have to adjust it as I sew. I just have to keep these raw edges together. And now I like to reinforce the seam, even though it probably isn't necessary. Now that both sleeves are on, it's time to sew it together along the sides. If there's any extra here at the underarm seam, now's the time to cut it off. And I just put a few pins in it. And I always sew this seam toward the trunk, not toward the sleeve. So I'll go ahead and pin that. And I'll do the same to the other side. And now I sew. Here's how I do a blind hem on a t-shirt. I turn the hem to the inside, about an inch, maybe a little less, depending on what you like, and pin it like this. And notice that I don't stick the pins in right at the edge, but down about 1/4 of an inch. And I open up the side seams so they will lay flat. Here's how I pinned it. But for a blind hem, I need to flip the hem under, and I'll be sewing along here. I use the zigzag stitch about here, and I keep the stitch length on 3. If you would rather use the blind hem stitch, you can, and that's this one. You just have to move this over to E. But I prefer the zigzag stitch on a t-shirt hem because it looks more consistent and sturdy to me. I'll show you the difference. On this hem, I used the zigzag stitch, and the stitches are really close together. You can see it's not coming apart at all. But on this shirt, I used a blind hem stitch, and there's more space between each stitch. There's a stitch here, 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 and I always feel like there's too much space. You can do a blind hem with just your regular presser foot, and that's how I did it for years. You just have to be careful and go slow. You want the needle to just barely grab this fold here. So you really have to use your hands and keep correcting it as you sew. Or you can use the blind hem presser foot. Mine looks like this. It came with my sewing machine when I bought it. This plastic piece goes right along the fold here, and it helps keep it in the right place as you sew, which will help keep the needle consistently in the right place. And you can adjust it, so you can decide how far over your needle will go. And I just pop off this one and click on this one. And now I'll be able to sew the hem faster and straighter. Okay, when I get back to where I started, I switch from a zigzag stitch to a straight stitch, so I can back stitch along the side of the fold for the knot. Okay, now let's look at it. Now, this will lay flat and look a lot better after it goes through the washer and dryer. Or you can iron it. And there's only one last thing I want to do to this t-shirt, which is to reinforce the side seams with a zigzag stitch. First I'll need to trim it a little near the sleeve opening. I think it turned out great. I don't think anybody would guess that this shirt was homemade. And now you know how I make a t-shirt for a child. But there's one more thing I want to show you before I go, and that's how I make a t-shirt for myself. So I got this shirt from a thrift store, of course, and the neck already fits me, so I don't have to rip it off. And I don't have to cut the shoulder seams. I just lay my pattern on top. And I would just cut out along the side and the hem and cut the sleeve out. And then I'd sew the sleeve on, sew it together, and hem it. And I get a new shirt for cheap that fits perfectly. And that's how I make a t-shirt from start to finish. Thanks for watching.